I'm Loren Kirkwood, a very active volunteer in the RSVP program. I retired from the Bell Telephone Laboratories in 1976 after having spent 47 years there in the field of fundamental research and development in the area of electromagnetic components. 1976 was a bicentennial year, and this led me into getting deeply involved in bicentennial activities, and the next thing I know, I was pretty much involved in history. Having lived in Morristown, I finally became the local historian for the town of Morristown. My position more recently has been to try to tout the historical heritage of Morristown. I've been a little bit lax in it. I have been also associated with the RSVP program as a member of the advisory board since 1976, and at the present time a member of their think tank. Now, all of the things that I do in the area of volunteerism is not necessarily historical, but that is my association and my hobby at the moment, and I'm in a whole new world now, and I've gotten out of the cloister laboratory where I spent the greater part of my life. Now, more recently, a group of seniors in Morristown asked me to put on a program, be a speaker at one of their programs. Now, they had heard and seen many of my slideshows of the history of Morristown, and yet they wanted something in the field of history, thinking of what could I tell them that was new, something they hadn't heard before. And I thought a little bit. I went to my cellar, found a lot of slides, and I finally came up with this particular program, which I now call the Statues and Monuments of Morristown. Many times a person seeking information has just recognized something looking at one of these sculptures or monuments, and they'll call up and ask information. Sometimes the monument has stimulated interest in behind-the-scenes stories as to what's there. I found that after I got involved in it that I kind of liked it. And I hope that maybe in my presentation today you'll get something out of it that maybe you hadn't heard or known before. So I thought putting a program together, I'd start with one that's a very popular statue in Morristown. It's the George Washington statue across from the Washington's headquarters on Morris Street in Morristown. That shows George sitting up on a horse, and gets an awful lot of attention. Of the hundreds of thousands of people each year that go through Morristown visiting there at the National Park, they see this particular statue. A lot of them want to know who the sculpture was, when it was put up, and then they get involved in other little things. Sometimes it's trivia, what's the name of the horse, and so forth. So anyway, this is not a ceremonial portrayal of Washington. Most pictures and portraits that people see of George Washington, he's dressed in very formal garb and some ceremonial occasion. In this particular portrayal, we see George deep in thought, dressed in winter uniform, typical of that which he wore while he was at the encampment here in Morristown. He was here 2 times, in 1777, his first encampment when he had his headquarters on the Green in Morristown in Arnold Tavern, and then in 1779 and 80 he came back, and this time the troops were stationed out in Jockey Hollow. He had his headquarters at the Ford Mansion, which is now called Washington's headquarters. Now, from time to time, people have looked at this particular statue and have commented that that horse is not typical of the type of a horse that Washington would have ridden. And this is true. That horse was modeled after a Sheffield Farms milk wagon horse. The woman, Miss Clark, who had a summer home on Normandy Heights nearby, also had a home in New York City. She felt that there should be a monument of George Washington in Morristown. She arranged to have this statue made and gave it to the town. In the meantime, while they were developing the statue, she was back at her home many times in New York, had taken a liking to this particular Sheffield Farms milk wagon horse, and it was used as a model. Now, what a lot of people don't always recall is that Washington didn't always travel by horseback. He went from place to place by coach, and when he got into a place that was local, they provided the horses locally. Well, one of the questions a lot of people have asked me about this particular horse is, what's its name? Now, after a while, we finally found that name. I don't know if it's the name of this particular horse that was there, but I do know that Washington's famous and most pet horse was Nelson. Now, Nelson was a chestnut, and he was a gelding. This horse that's on the monument here is supposed to be a stallion. Regardless, it is not white because ceremonial horses are white. Artists made them that way. But here Washington picked up a horse that he might have had locally, and very likely, dressed as he was out maybe taking a trip to visit the soldiers in Jockey Hollow or so. He was not in his formal garb. A lot of people also look at this horse, they wander around, and then all of a sudden somebody calls their attention and they look at something they never thought of before. Now, we know many times people talk about the other end of the horse or so forth, so let's take a look at the other end of the horse, where a lot of people really haven't looked. And the questions I keep getting are, why is there a knot in the horse's tail? Ceremonial pictures of them always showed the horse out with full flowing hair. Well, it so happens this is what's known as a mud tail. A mud tail was used to tie up the tail so that it wouldn't get dirty and messy and so forth. If it was on a parade, they might have braided it, or in a parade generally they just let it flow. But in the case of a workhorse or so, they didn't bob horses' tails. They needed the tail for fly control. So in this particular one, they tied it in a knot, and it's referred to generally as a mud tail. Well, let's go on to another little statue in Morristown. This is the Thomas Paine statue over in Burnham Park in Morristown. Like the Washington Monument, this is bronze. It was originally covered with gold leaf, but a lot of people have appropriated it, and it now has a very peculiar color where the gold has been picked off, and I don't know if you can really describe the color because it's a conglomerate of greens. Over the years, well, this statue really cost $75,000, and it was given to the town by the International Thomas Paine Society, and it is the first historic statue of Payne dedicated in America. It was unveiled on July 4th, 1950. To me, that's not so long ago. I remember it well. Payne was a major factor in the success of the Revolution, not only his influential writings, but his active duty as a soldier. He was an aide to General Greene, served as a clerk in the Pennsylvania Assembly, and made substantial financial contributions to the cause. He was a prolific writer, and his Age of Reason contained controversial ideas on religion, which turned many people against him. Many of you may recall the unrest in Morristown relative to accepting this statue because of that. Another trivial item, somewhat related to this, you might say, is that Route 202, which runs through Morristown, is known as Thomas Paine Highway. I think maybe I can go to another military monument at this time. Let's take a picture and look at the picture of the monument on the green known as the Civil War Monument. This is a 50-foot shaft with an 8-foot figure of a Civil War soldier on the top. This was erected by the people of Morris County, not Morristown, to the memory of the county soldiers and sailors who fell during the Civil War. It was created by a local craftsman, Henry Davis, for $14,000, including site preparation. This is the first monument erected in Morristown and was unveiled on July 4th, 1871. During an all-day 4th of July celebration, including a parade, speeches, fireworks, and so forth, about 100 years before Memorial Days became special sales days. Aside from appropriate inscriptions on the base, the shaft is divided horizontally into sections, each carrying the name of a battle in which Morris County soldiers and sailors fought. There are a total of 12 battles cited on that monument. Another war monument is the one in the front of the Municipal building known as the Cenotaph. Cenotaph, I always get twisted in that. That's an unusual word. I really don't know what it means. However, this is on in front of the Municipal building on South Street in Morristown. It's dedicated on November 12th, 1928, on the 10th anniversary of the signing of the armistice. That's World War I armistice. It was erected by the people of Morristown. It features a winged victory with a large wing spreading protectively over rows of soldiers in uniform and shouldered, with their guns shouldered and marching in the background. Associated with this monument are 4 bronze lamps, which and 2 bronze flagpoles. The bases of the lamps carry shields bearing inscriptions of World War I battles where men from Morristown fought. These are such things as Belleau Woods, Chateau Thierry, and so forth. On the flagpoles, each of the flagpoles has 3 panels on it depicting different aspects of the war. In this particular view, you see a farmer with a plow. One of the others shows a mother with her babe because the father's going off to war. And the third one shows a soldier. The lamps are duplicated at the other end of this little pond that you saw a picture of earlier when I showed the lamp picture. While we're down in this particular area, let's take a look at the doors of the Morristown Municipal building. This building, the doors to this building are bronze, and the molds used to make these are residing at the present time in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. The doors are divided into a total of 8 sections, each of which depicts some significant event in the history of Morristown. This particular panel shows Alfred Vail and Samuel Morse working on the development of the electromagnetic telegraph. And here are Betsy Schuyler and Hamilton doing their courting. Well, I don't know. Somehow I think, let us take a break and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of the other monuments.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Retired Senior Volunteer Seniors in Action program, presenting statues and monuments of Morristown, narrated by Loren Kirkwood, Morristown historian, a retired senior volunteer and a member of our Speakers Bureau. If you are interested in programs provided by our Speakers Bureau for your organization, please give us a call at 538-5947. That's 538-5947. And now back to Loren Kirkwood and our program.
This monument that you're looking at is a World War II Korean War monument. It was erected on a triangle on the southeast end of Morristown, on a triangle between South Street and Madison Avenue. It was actually an area monument again to the veterans from Morris Township, Morris Plains, and Morristown. One thing about it, on the shaft, there are 4 corners, and they depict images or representations of the 4 branches of service that the Marines, the sailors, soldiers, and so forth. This was unveiled on Memorial Day in 1958, and most of the money used to put up this monument came from Morristown's philanthropist mayor, W. Parsons Todd. This particular monument that you're looking at now is the Volunteer Fireman Monument. The bell that is used on this monument was the first general fire alarm bell purchased as such by the town of Morristown after they abandoned the uses of church bells for fire alarms. One of the significant things that was found in the research of this particular bell was that 72% of the metal in that bell is copper from the Quincy mine in Hancock, Michigan, which was owned by the Parsons Todd family, and its significant is actually therefore a Morristown bell. It is also a big memorial to a former active fireman in Morristown, an old Morristown resident by the name of Tom Day, who put this whole package together and arranged to have the bell mounted as such. Not far from the bell on the green is this old fountain, which was put in Morristown back in 1907. This particular fountain is now located in the Headquarters Mall section, shopping area in Morristown, right across from Macy's department store. As a memorial, it is not an active fountain. However, the side you're looking at was the horse trough, because those days horses were popular in town. And the other side of the fountain shows the upper portion where humans were supposed to be able to be refreshed, and the lower part is for animals and probably the youngsters who run around barefooted, wanted to rinse off their feet. Who knows? However, that fountain has been saved, and it is there. Now, right off, as one stands there and looks at this big department store in the background, along the top of it are a number of commemorative plaques, all illustrating significant people that had something to do with the early history of Morristown. And associated with each of the plaques is some little emblem typical of whatever they were. If they were a farmer, there's a plow on it. A man who was a printer has a printing press shown on it. There are a total of, I think there are a total of 18 plaques around the top of that building. I now take you around the corner of the green, and we'll go down Washington Street to the courthouse. Over the entrance of the Morristown Courthouse is a statue of Lady Justice. She's standing there holding scales where she's supposedly weighing the arguments of justice. The sword is there, and her right hand is to symbolize strict enforcement of equal justice. Now, traditionally, Lady Justice is shown blindfolded. And the feeling is that she's not influenced by outside influences and so forth. But in Morristown, they always feel that justice is rendered with their eyes open, and therefore they're proud of this particular monument. This is wood, by the way. We don't know who made it or when it was really there. It was put up there in 1827 when the building was built, but we don't know anything else about it. But we do know there is no other portrayal we have ever heard of showing her not blindfolded. This particular monument is a granite boulder just on the green, put up by the DAR to represent the spot where the first courthouse in Morristown was located. This is back in the 1700s when they put up the first courthouse and jail. They had it there. It was 1827 when the new courthouse was built, and they abandoned it. At that time, the land was owned by the Presbyterian Church, but they let the county use it for a courthouse site. If you will look down on the right-hand side of that particular picture, you'll see a kind of a white square off on the corner, and here's a picture of it. It represents the spot where a time capsule was buried. It's warm to me because I was the one who buried that time capsule. It has a statement is to be dug up in 2023. I'm sure I'm not going to be around, but in it, this was 1976 when we buried that. We had all the school children in Morris County make birthday cards to the United States, and that is what we have buried in that particular time capsule. Don't try to dig it up for any values other than that type. There's no gold buried in it. This is a controversial monument on the town green. It has a statement on it that the green was given to the trustees of the Morristown Green by the Presbyterian Church, and that is not true. It's unfortunate that that monument is still there because it causes much concern. On the other end of the green is a marker stating that the trustees bought the monument, bought the green from the church, and that is true. I have 5 copies of the deeds that were used to transfer that land, and they all talk about the $1,600 that was used in 1816 to purchase that land. It was not a gift to the town of Morristown. However, it's still there, and we'll have to live with it for a while. Up in the back of the courthouse on the hill, we have what is known as Fort Nonsense. That was an encampment used in 79 and 80 when Washington soldiers were out in Jockey Hollow. There are many stories as to why it was there. It was a good lookout and a lot of things. Well, it got all torn apart during the Depression years. The WPA had some money up, and the CCC boys went in to clean up the site, and as such, it was totally destroyed. The National Park Service now has money, and this year, and they hope by 1990, the end of 1990, to have restored that particular Fort Nonsense to what they seem to think it looked like in 1779 and 80 when it was originally built there. There's another little stone out on the edge of town. It's not much of a monument, but it's a little marker known as on the site where General Knox encamped. That's on Route 24, just across from the Morristown Pool. As you approach the county park known as Foster Fields, you'll see that little stone off on the side. It's one way of putting up a monument without spending a lot of money, and yet it's significant. This is not a monument for the town, but it is a monument and it is a form of art. This is a sundial, and it's on the lawn of the Presbyterian Church, and it was given to the church by the DAR to commemorate another little story of Morristown history, which has to do with George Washington, who was an Episcopalian, having communion at a Presbyterian church, and this was the time when they had the smallpox epidemic in Morristown during the encampment. Now, these scenes that I'm looking at, showing you now, are not monuments as such, but they're plaques to commemorate significant things in Morristown's history. This particular one is on the entrance to the Epstein's department store women's shop. It marks the building where the Continental Army had their stores. I'm reading the wrong one. I'm sorry. This is not that at all. This is the one that shows where Dickerson's Tavern was located, which is on the corner of Martin Luther King and Spring Street. That building was called Dickerson's Tavern, and of course was torn down some years ago. But it was in that building that Benedict Arnold had his first treason trial. A lot of people know about him, and they know stories, but they didn't know that he was a character involved in many things. In this particular instance, he had some deals going with some people who were providing uniforms and so forth to the Army, and he was getting kickbacks, and Washington had to have a little court hearing, and they ended up giving him a spanking rather than a court-martial. However, that is what that monument, that little plaque that you're looking at now represents. This particular one now is the one that is at the entrance to the department store where the Continental stores were located. The building was torn down, was burned down back in around 1846. If you noticed the picture that was on the background during intermission, they showed a picture of Morristown in 1844. And 2 years later, that big building that is shown in that particular scene burned, and this building that you're looking at here, known as the Continental Stores, was next door to it. I somehow or other got off on the program here today, and I had a feeling I had another slide in here, and I don't know what I did with it while we were talking. But in the meantime, while I'm closing the program for you, on your screen, I think you may see a picture of the hotel that I was referring to, and the Continental Stores was that little yellow building, if you have color television, which was the one what Washington used to store his munitions. Well, anyway, I've enjoyed doing this today. I don't know to what extent you've learned anything from it, but I'm going to say this. If at any time you have any ideas, you want information, don't hesitate to get in touch with me, call, and I'll try to answer your questions. Thank you.
This edition of Seniors in Action has shown some of the more than 650 retired senior volunteers who give their time and talent freely at over 80 locations in Morris County alone. For further information about this program, or for any information concerning retired senior volunteer opportunities, call us at RSVP. The telephone number is 538-7947. I repeat, 538-7947. And until we meet again on our next show, I'm Larry Garton, a retired senior volunteer.
Okay, cut. Save the lights.